From the Gulf States newsroom, this is the Gulf States Gumbo, your weekly serving of stories from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I'm regional news editor Tanya Ott, chopping it up this week. Non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, have been in the news a lot lately, especially around large industrial development projects like data centers. In places like Bessemer, Alabama, for instance, city officials signed NDAs with a data center developer, barring them from publicly releasing information about the project. Now, that's just one project, one data center. But the NDA drew a lot of criticism and concern from residents and transparency advocates. In Louisiana, the use of NDAs is exploding. The agreements have really become a fixture of Governor Jeff Landry's administration. So much so that, as senior reporter Drew Hawkins found, Landry himself signed one with Meta, the trillion-dollar tech company building a massive data center in North Louisiana. Now, Gumbo listeners, and really anybody who follows the Gulf States newsroom, know that Drew has been reporting on NDAs a lot this year. In April, he brought you an episode called Did Your Elected Officials Sign an NDA? If you live in Louisiana, the answer is yes. If you haven't heard it, you should definitely go back and listen. But since then, he's found even more NDAs, including some that go all the way up to the federal government. There is a lot to go over here, so Drew is joining me to try to unpack it all. We'll see how that goes. Hi, Drew.
Hey, Tanya. And it's our first time on the Gumbo together. First time stirring the pot.
I know. This is exciting. Okay.
And like you mentioned, too, we got a lot, but we got this. We can do it. We can go through it all.
We do. Okay, so before we dive in, let's set the table for just a second. It may seem really basic, but what is an NDA and what does it do?
No, it's a good question. Sometimes you get so deep into these things that you can forget that maybe not everybody knows this, right? Okay, so an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, is a legal contract that basically says that if you sign it, you can't talk about certain things. And now, this can vary from NDA to NDA, but when it comes to negotiations around large industrial developments, like a data center, for example, it generally includes what it is, who the company is, the financial terms, power and water usage, basically anything that involves the project, right? So if you sign an NDA, you legally can't talk about it, or you could be sued.
Okay, so bring us up to speed then on your initial reporting earlier this spring. Back then, it feels like 30 years ago, doesn't it? I'm sure it does for you. You reported that at least 50 elected officials signed NDAs related to large industrial development projects in Louisiana. Where do we stand on those now?
Yeah, that was 30 lifetimes ago, it feels like. When that first story came out back in March, we reported on what was then really this new and emerging practice in Louisiana under Governor Jeff Landry. So records I obtained showed that at least 50 public officials had signed NDAs with Louisiana Economic Development, or LED. And that's the state agency that's responsible for, attracting businesses to the state. That includes state representatives, state senators, the lieutenant governor, mayors, city council members, a sheriff, even a school board superintendent, right? Every single parish in Louisiana has at least one elected official who signed an NDA. And at the time, that was, obviously a pretty big deal. But since then, that number has grown to at least 54 elected officials that signed an NDA with LED. And as it currently stands, the leaders of both legislative chambers have signed NDAs, along with 77% of the entire Louisiana Senate and about 13% of the Louisiana House.
Okay, wow. That is a lot. So it's becoming almost just normalized at this point, it sounds like. I mean, what's the reasoning behind why these agreements are needed?
Yeah, there are a few reasons that officials and companies give me when I ask this question, which I have asked many times over the past year. They all usually say the same few things, right? So from the company perspective, one of the big reasons is to avoid revealing potential projects to its shareholders until a deal is more concrete. So they don't maybe trade stock using that information, which is technically referred to as non-public material information, right?
Okay, so that makes sense from a company's perspective, I guess. But what about the elected officials? What's the logic there?
Yeah, so the reason they give, or one of the big reasons they give, is to protect proprietary information, trade secrets, right? But Louisiana's public records laws already protect this.
Huh.
But what you'll also often hear is this idea of competitiveness, right? NDAs, they allow states like Louisiana to offer better deals to companies looking for places for their large developments.
Okay.
So keeping negotiations and project details a secret make those companies more comfortable engaging with those officials. But as we've reported, many experts say that that logic really doesn't hold water, right? I mean, if you just think about this, if officials in Louisiana are trying to land a big project with a big company, right? And they all sign NDAs. Well, that means they can't talk about it with officials in places like Mississippi or Ohio or Pennsylvania. So that means that that company is then able to shop around and sort of choose from the highest bidder, right?
Interesting. So you've also found NDAs aren't just being signed with elected officials, right?
Mm.
A recent investigation of yours found that the practice extends to like average state employees as well. Walk us through that side of it.
Yeah, so, at least 121 Louisiana state employees have signed NDAs with the office of the governor, with Governor Jeff Landry's office. And those agreements are even more strict than the ones that elected officials signed with LED, that agency we mentioned earlier. These agreements, they ban employees from discussing anything that they might have learned as a result of working at the governor's office. They also don't have a time limit. They don't expire after a few years or after a project is publicly announced. These NDAs last for life. So employees, they can be fired or sued even after leaving state government for violating those agreements.
That's pretty wild when you think about it. Now, some of the people might be wondering why it matters if state employees sign an NDA. Why is that such a big deal?
No, I mean, it's a fair question. I think, to help understand why, it's worth taking a second to think about just how many people surround an executive like a governor, right? I mean, whenever Governor Jeff Landry makes any decision, whether he's weighing a potential policy or even just scheduling a meeting, there's a whole team of people behind him. The difference between Landry and his predecessor, John Bell Edwards, is many of the people surrounding Landry signed those confidentiality agreements. And I wanted to find out, was this the case under Edwards? So I talked to his former deputy chief, Eric Hull, and he said that these kinds of things just didn't happen.
I don't remember signing an NDA, and I think I would.
And just to add to this, it's important to look at who signed these NDAs. I mean, it's everybody from chiefs of staff all the way down to like student interns.
That's kind of weird.
Yeah, they're just there for their summer job or a temp job, getting some experience in state government. So it's really this wide swath of people who signed an NDA that prevents them from ever discussing anything that they learn while they're working at the governor's office.
So let's stick with this just for a minute, because you said Hall, the former deputy chief, said NDAs weren't used at all under the former Louisiana Governor John Bell Edwards, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. And this is one of those stories where I really had to talk to a lot of people to get an understanding of how normal or maybe abnormal using NDAs is in the governor's office. I had to, really follow this trail of connections.
So take us down that trail with you.
Okay, well, I hope you got some sturdy hiking boots. So when I called up Hall, he said he definitely doesn't remember ever signing an NDA, but he had some thoughts on who to talk to next.
You should try to get in touch with, obviously, like lawyers, which I'm not one.
So that's exactly what I did. I called up Matthew Block, a lawyer who worked as Edwards' chief executive counsel, basically his top lawyer, until 2022. And Block said the same thing that Hall said.
I certainly never signed any NDAs, and I don't think anyone in the governor's office ever did.
So Block, he said he can't speak for everyone, but he would remember if legal agreements like NDAs were used often. I mean, he was, after all, the governor's top lawyer.
That was not common practice.
But just to be sure, I checked with someone who would have been more familiar with, like employee matters, someone who worked in the governor's office. They would be overseeing them, right? So for that, I talked to Mark Cooper. He served as Edwards' chief of staff for most of his 2 terms.
I'm not aware of any being signed. I know I never signed one. I'm not aware of that being a practice.
So that's 3 top aides to former Louisiana Governor John Bell Edwards who say they never signed an NDA and they didn't know anyone in the governor's office who did. I also did check with the state archives. And by check with, I mean I filed public records request. But that did not turn up any similar agreement. So it really just reinforces that, right? I did, of course, also reach out to Governor Landry's office, and they did not respond to specific questions about the agreements, but they did give me a statement where his top lawyer wrote that the NDAs, quote, protects both the integrity of the governor's decision-making as well as public trust.
Okay. I'm a little beat with that. That is a lot, as a very, very long journey for you. I guess the question I have is, why are these NDAs being used under Governor Landry when they weren't used before? What kind of insight do you have on that front?
So I do want to be fully 1,000% clear here that the real answer is I don't know, right? I mean, that's something that it would be really great to get a response from Governor Landry's office on, but they won't answer my questions, just like they won't answer questions from me about NDAs really in general, right? But going back to Hall, that former deputy chief, he said that under former Governor Edwards, they had what he called a culture of trust. Basically, he said that they just trusted top aides to not leak sensitive information about projects. And it appears that the Landry administration does not have that same culture of trust. At least that's my best guess at it. Hall said that NDAs just really aren't necessary, and instead, they promote what he called a culture of fear.
You don't have to have a sort of carrot and stick mentality when it comes to sensitive information.
And as you know, Tanya, the NDAs do not stop there.
They do not. So let's turn to the really big one right now. Governor Landry, in your investigations, you also found he signed an NDA with Meta, the tech company building the $50 billion data centers in Richland Parish in North Louisiana. Okay, walk us through that one.
Yes. So Governor Landry himself, personally, with his own handwriting, not like a digital e-signature, signed an NDA with Meta. And there's a couple of things that are really interesting here, right? So first of all, it's an agreement that's directly with the company. Like, this NDA is from Meta's own legal department. So, of course, there's the highest public official in the state of Louisiana signing an NDA with a company worth more than the entire state of Louisiana.
Yeah, that's a pretty big one.
Yeah, pretty big deal. So it's also really worth looking at what this NDA covers because, I mentioned these agreements can really vary on what it is that they cover, what you can't say, how long they last, and also how they're enforced, et cetera, right? So this NDA Landry signed with Meta defines confidential information very broadly, including things like proposed terms, pricing, financial information, and other details about the negotiations. And actually, even the existence of the NDA itself is classified as confidential. So Landry can't even confirm that it exists according to that language.
So it's kind of like Fight Club, right? The first rule of Fight Club.
Yes, exactly. The first rule of NDAs is you can't talk about NDAs,
exactly.
Right? But, there's also this publicity clause in that NDA that prohibits both Landry and Meta from publicly announcing or discussing the agreement or relationship without the other side's written approval. And that restriction explicitly covers disclosures to reporters, blogs, trade publications, and other, public audiences. So what that means is that if Governor Landry, again, the highest elected official in the entire state, if he wants to talk about something related to Meta's data center, he has to check with the company first to make sure that's okay.
That sounds a little problematic, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, sure. And that's one way to put it.
Yeah. So it obviously probably makes journalists' jobs in general just a lot harder because everything has to be run up a chain somewhere. And you hope that you get approval.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. I know you've talked to a lot of people for this reporting that you've been doing now over many months. What do the experts say about this?
Yeah. I mean, I have talked to a lot of people about this just to try to get an understanding. One of them is a guy named David Coulier, and he is the director of the Breckner Freedom of Information Project at the University of Florida. He said that NDAs really only benefit the companies and they keep communities where these giant projects like data centers are being built in the dark.
Information is power, and these folks, they're powerful and they want to make a lot of money. So they're going to control information as closely as they can so they have an advantage.
So that goes back to what you said earlier in our conversation about how these NDAs may not necessarily make a state like Louisiana more competitive. They just sort of like silo them off so they don't know what other states might be offering.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I know in many ways, Governor Landry, this is a big official to be signing an agreement with Meta, but he's not the only one, right? You have another investigation going, one of many that found the practice goes all the way up to Congress.
Yes, you get an investigation and you get an investigation. Yeah, I mean, it's
lucky them.
You're exactly right, though. I mean, this goes to the federal government. Representative Julia Letlow, she also signed an NDA with Meta. It's actually the same exact document that Landry signed with the company. It's from Meta's own legal department, right? And what's important here is that not only, of course, is Letlow a sitting member of Congress and the Trump-endorsed Republican candidate for U.S. Senate, she's also a federal official. So there's really no reason for her to be involved in a local state project like the Meta data center.
That has me wondering, obviously, Meta has some stuff that comes before Congress at times. And does that mean that's going to, zip her lips? Like, would she not be able to speak out loud in the congressional hearing with Meta?
I mean, it's a really good question. Again, sometimes with these things, unfortunately, I still have to say I don't actually know because I can't know it unless they tell me and they don't answer questions, including Representative Letlow. But an important point, I'm glad you brought this up, is that Meta is also a federal lobbyist. I mean, the company spent more than $25 million lobbying the federal government in just 2025. So there is definitely a conflict there.
Now, it's not just that Letlow signed the NDA, but you found out something after she signed that agreement. You found out that she then bought stock in Meta.
All right, here we go. So Letlow signed the NDA with Meta in June 2024. And then within just a few months, she bought stock in Meta and NVIDIA, which is a company that makes the computer chips that data centers use, right? She also did not disclose any of these trades for more than a year, which is well past the 45-day deadline that's required under what's called the Stock Act, which is a federal law that bans members of Congress from trading stocks using information that they would have gained through their official position.
Okay, so on paper, that looks pretty suspicious, but what are you hearing from the ethics experts on this one?
Absolutely. I mean, congressional rules are wonky. So I did have to talk to a lot more people and get some insight into what this means. Is this actually a big deal? Is it normal or abnormal? So for that, I talked to Kedrick Payne, and he's currently the general counsel of a group called the Campaign Legal Center. But before that, he was a former deputy chief counsel at the House Office of Congressional Ethics. And he told me that this is something that it's definitely worth investigating.
There are definitely some potential ethics issues when you have an NDA with a company which is already abnormal, and then you buy stock in the same company soon thereafter.
Another expert I talked to said that ethics investigations, they can really be influenced by whatever party is in power at the time, right? So right now, the Republican Party has control over Congress. So will they be interested in investigating one of their own colleagues is the question. And that's something we'll have to really just wait and see.
And what did Letlow say about these trades, the NDA and the stocks and all that stuff?
Well, not much, really. I mean, she wouldn't agree to an interview and she wouldn't respond to specific questions about the NDA or the trades. But a spokesperson did send me a statement, and that said that she doesn't manage her own stock portfolio. Those trades were made by her broker, and she had no involvement. But it's also worth pointing out that this is a pretty common defense whenever there are concerns about a member of Congress and, things like insider trading. I mean, you can look at someone like Nancy Pelosi. She's famously said her husband manages their stocks and she has no involvement, right? But in this case, you have the NDA with Meta, a company that's also a federal lobbyist, like I mentioned. So that's really the big distinction here. And this also isn't like an isolated thing for Letlow. When she did finally file her personal financial disclosures in January, there were 210 individual stock trades from the last 2 years that weren't reported on time. 100 of them, including the Meta and NVIDIA stock, were more than a year late. If you add it all together, all those trades were worth between $225,000 and more than $3 million, which is that broad range that members of Congress are allowed to report.
So she's behind on all of this stuff, and she may not be the only one in Congress. We don't know unless we look at all of it. But is there a mechanism within Congress to, address this lax reporting?
So the lax reporting, I'm not 1,000% sure on that. However, there is currently legislation that would prohibit members of Congress from trading stocks at all, right? And ironically, Julia Letlow voted to support that. So she's basically, and again, too, talking to those ethics experts, they say that that's also pretty common for members of Congress to say, like, don't do that thing that I am also doing, right? So, yeah, I mean, there is currently legislation. It passed the House. We'll have to see what the Senate does. But there is legislation that would address situations like this or prevent them.
Okay. Well, I guess this is going to be one of those things we're going to have to bring you back on the gumbo for, an update when we hear
luckily,
more.
I work here, and so I'll be back.
Senior reporter Drew Hawkins. Wow, you have been busy. Thank you so much for sitting down with us and walking us through these winding trails, if you will.
Happy to do it, Tanya. Thanks for having me.
Okay. You know what? Hold on a second, Drew. Before you go, we have the final closing segment.
That's
we
right.
have the Gulf States gem. We've been talking about some, kind of really heady stuff. The gem is supposed to highlight something we love about the region. I know these investigations really relied on documents and maybe didn't involve a lot of time in the field, but I'm curious if you've got a gem for us this week.
Yeah, for these, a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, and a lot of spreadsheets and going through thousands of pages of documents. So I did not get to go see as much of this beautiful region as I would for some of our other stories, right? So, but I do have a gem, and it's it's kind of cheesy, maybe whatever, but I want to go with public records laws because, these things can really vary from state to state, but they can be so valuable, not just for us as reporters, but just for people, for the residents, the people that live here. And like I said, they can vary from state to state. Like I know Alabama can be pretty tough.
Oh my gosh, you got that right. So I've worked as a journalist in several states, 4 or 5, I lost count. Alabama's public records law is one of the most restrictive that I've seen. It starts with who can get the records under the law. Only residents of Alabama can get the records, and you have to submit like a copy of your driver's license or a voter registration card with your written request for the documents. What this means, though, from an accountability standpoint, is that if you have a national news organization, let's say ProPublica, who's done reporting down here, the Washington Post, New York Times, if they want to access any records in Alabama through public records requests, they pretty much have to find a proxy, which often ends up being an Alabama-based journalist who's going to file that request on their behalf. Interestingly, about 5-6 years ago, there was a study presented at the Global Conference on Transparency Awareness Research. Who knew that was a thing? They've got something for everything. Anyway, it ranked the open records request compliance of U.S. states and Washington, D.C., and Alabama ranked 51st. The worst.
All the way at the bottom. And, that
all
thing,
the way at the bottom.
You mentioned the proxy. Obviously, we know this all too well. Our newsroom, we cover Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. Louisiana recently required the whole ID thing. I've had to take a picture of my driver's license and send it to the governor's office so that they'll give me the records. And we pretty commonly have to have our colleagues based in Alabama file records requests for stories that we're working on there, right? So yeah, I mean, I'm not super surprised as someone who's dealt with this a lot. And for this reporting in Louisiana specifically, like I said, it was really all reliant on those documents that were all obtained through public records requests, whether I did it myself or a source did it and passed them on to me. So there's just so much work that goes into piecing all this stuff together, but you can't do it unless you have those records. So again, cheesy, lame, whatever, my Gulf States gems would be public records.
Journalists everywhere, hurrah for you on that. We love it. Thanks for joining us, Drew. So great to have you on the show, and fully anticipate we'll bring you back again with some updates.
Thanks again, Tanya.
This week's show is cooked up by the Gulf States Newsroom team. Our theme music is by DJ Supreme. Special thanks to our partner stations, WBHM, Mississippi Public Broadcasting, WWNO, and WRKF. You can find us in your podcast feeds every Friday. Look us up and be sure to subscribe. I'm your host, Tanya Ott. Thanks for listening, and don't you forget to stir that roux.